welcome to another episode of HiX-Men Report. Is a special red issue of House of X5 that we're talking about. So which means we have no time for pleasantry and we're gonna get the ball rolling from the get-go. Hello everyone, Zach, Peter, Tyler, welcome. Join, thank you for joining and all of that. Yes. All right. So we begin the issue with Professor X saying, "Do you want to know the real difference between them and us? Until now, we were never given a chance." And with that, this week's HiX-Men House of X issue 5 begins. So we start off with a very important scene where Polaris and Magneto are talking to each other, and they were discussing about the regeneration process. They're talking about, how when mutants are no longer running for fear and persecution, how they can come together and do something really awesome. And this awesome thing is apparently giving birth, or giving life to a husk and then giving them soul and everything. So with that, Zach, what was your initial thought?
So this is the big revelation that House of X has been leading up to. And I think a lot of people who have been reading the series, and certainly a lot of people who have been watching this series, the HiX-Men Report, will not be as terribly shocked as the issue expects you will be. Because we've been piecing the clues together since the first issue of this, and it turns out that we were pretty darn close to the mark here. Now, there are particular details of it that we're going to go over that I don't think we or anybody else could have predicted in exactly that form. But the basic premise here, that Cerebro has in fact been storing up mutant minds and placing them into regenerated or recreated bodies, is exactly what has been going on in Krakoa.
Right, and not just that, we also realized that the reason for why Jean Grey needed to be connected to Professor X way back in House of X4, that we were all asking about, that what was going on with that also gets explained in a way, because, eye clouds and whatnot. Tyler, what was your initial thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, I think Lorna here sounds really young, kind of like a teenager, and kind of very similar to Marvel Girl. So I feel like, I think, I mentioned it before. I came in with a certain type of expectation, thinking that these are not the real X-Men. So I think it is done deliberately. But if it turns out to be not the case, then I have serious issue with the voices, of this character right here, and the conversation between Polaris and Magneto, because I think Peter has a lot to say about their relationship here.
Well, yeah, I would just say this, Polaris is a weird character to cast in the receiving info dump, especially because her relationship with Magneto is really fraught. So I kind of was appreciating the scene on two different levels. There was a level where I was like, I wish this was like Surge or Pixie or Glob, or it just in my head, when I replaced Polaris with one of the younger X-Men, I was like, ooh, this is actually really fun because it shows Magneto as a parental figure to the next generation. Whereas I feel like it was a weird beat in his parental figure with Lorna's story, but that's something else. I think going off of what Zach said, what's really interesting here is we've really gotten very close on the broad strokes of this plot. But something that's really interesting is it's not all Omega mutants. I think based on some of our discussion and my prediction, certainly, when they said the 5 and we saw this 5 roll out, it was going to be Hope, Proteus, and 3 other Omega mutants, but it wasn't. And so it goes to show you don't have to be right. None of the rest of them are Omega. Oh no, Elixir is too, but 2 that are not. Yeah. So it goes to show that you don't have to be at the peak of your mutancy to be viable for this plan for the mutant race to continue. And I thought that was actually a incredibly interesting aspect of it. And then it really didn't have much to do with Krakoa. Krakoa, almost, to really go in a metaphor that we don't have to extend, Krakoa, or simile as the case may be, Krakoa was almost the womb that these eggs are all nested in, but it didn't generate the eggs. It's not the actual generation of them. So I think there were some like twists and pivots that even if you had gotten pretty far down the track with us watching all of these weeks, that there was still some surprises. Like, who the hell thought it was going to be Gold Balls and Eva Bell? Good Lord.
Yeah.
That, I mean, Fangirlz was
is
just joking on Twitter about, like, wouldn't it be funny if they showed up and then they showed up?
This is obviously Hickman's big sly joke, and it's also, you know, Hickman very overtly said that it's his homage to Brian Michael Bendis, who was really his entree into the world of Big Two comics writing. So this was his thank you to Bendis by bringing in somebody that Bendis obviously created as a jokey, terrible comic book character.
No, but
who knew
like,
he was laying golden eggs this entire time?
Right.
Maybe if this resurrection thing doesn't work out, he could go work for Blanca.
No, but Hickman also mentioned, like, I mean, he posted something on his Twitter account saying that, you know, watch this man, you know, I made a career out of, like, you know, picking his crumbs. So I think he's really just, you know, making an homage to Bendis, I think, at this point in time.
Yeah, and it's because, like, he also followed Bendis on Avengers, and he's following Bendis on X-Men in a way. So, you know, picking up the crumbs. But here's the thing, though. Talking to an ex-noob, myself, why is Polaris's voice a problem? Because I think all three of you kind of mentioned that. Like, why, and especially, like, you know, I think, Peter, you can kind of enlighten me on that. Like, why does it bother you?
Well, I'll just set the frame for it, and then I'd love to hear what Tyler and Zach think, since they got the benefit of introducing for me this prior time around. So 2 things about Polaris. One is that her relationship with Magneto as father is very fraught. That didn't exist for a long time, and that even in her introduction, there was a hint that she was his daughter, and then it was all an act. And I feel like, and Zach can correct me, we've been back and forth at least twice on whether or not he's her father. So it's not like this, it's not even like a parental relationship that Xavier has to Legion where they're estranged. It's like a relationship she's never really sure how much she trusts him as dad. So there's that aspect. And then there's also, Polaris is actually one of the more educated mutants in the traditional sense. Like her and Alex both are like working on PhDs, and
I think they're geologist, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah. So, you know, biology isn't her field of expertise, but those were the things that I was weighing. This kind of back and forth nature of her relationship with Magneto. And then also, like, I don't know if it works for her to be the one to be like, oh, really? Like, it just seems like a little too starry-eyed to me. But what did you guys think?
I feel like in the actual things that she's saying, she doesn't really, I don't think, come off as starry-eyed and stupid. I mean, she's actually using, you know, pretty sophisticated terminology to talk about what it is that she doesn't understand, but she is certainly being used as a vehicle for Magneto's info dumping. Hickman wants to deliver this. Here. Right, like, how does Magneto know all of this? I mean, I guess Moira explained it to him, or via Xavier, when it was all dumped into his head. I mean, I guess the idea is that all of this is coming originally from Moira, but structurally this scene is Hickman has a lot of information that he just wants to throw at the reader, and Polaris is sitting there as a vehicle to ask Magneto about it so that he can inform us. So I think it's clunkily done on that level. And he also, like, he wants here to clearly reestablish that she is supposed to be his daughter. And we've seen no background to that, but I guess we're just supposed to presume that it's happened somewhere between the scenes of whenever the series started.
Yeah, like, Freya, did you know that Polaris is Magneto's daughter before reading this scene? And did the scene communicate that to you?
No.
No?
No.
Oh, okay, well then fail them both.
She has 2 lines of dialogue, and she calls him father on both.
Hang on, she said father, but I wasn't sure it's just because of the cultiness of this.
Because everybody's calling each other brother and sister in the next scene too. So.
And Magneto's like the main daddy, the zaddy of all.
Yeah, he's like a daddy. You know, Magneto and Xavier are the 2 daddies at this point. So I was like, oh, one of them is a father, the other one of them is a daddy. Yeah, like, you know, that's what I was thinking about. Like, I honestly thought it was because of Magneto's status. He's being called father. That, you know,
I'm going to choose to read it that way and enjoy it much more.
And here's also another thing, though, because you were talking about that they have a fraught relationship and stuff like that, which I learned later on because we were chatting. You guys were chatting about it, and I was reading up on that. The thing is, though, is it because that now everyone is in Krakoa and everyone is told, I don't care what the future was, what the past was. Everyone now behave yourself. I don't care what
maybe with a little psychic push.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because there has been a little bit, and that's why everyone is like, "Oh, father, tell me about this." Well,
No, but
child.
I mean, the other thing also is that like, how would Magneto know this? Because he have seen this before. I mean, Banshee is alive. The Cuckoos are alive. The other two of them. So this process has been done before. This is not the first time. I mean, we are seeing it for the very first time, but this is not new to Magneto. And
right, it's clearly been happening in the background this whole time.
Yeah,
200 a day. Like, they are aware.
Yeah, and also I think for me, I'm thinking Lorna is not Lorna. Lorna is the teenage version. They did not put everything back to her.
I think that at this point, this issue more than anything else kind of throws a lot of those theories to the wind.
No, I disagree with that actually, and we can go through that later on. But I think it is in the data dump.
So I mean, that's kind of like, where I wanted to go next. Anyway, it's just because they kind of they've talked about how this is done. This egg guy lays down the egg or creates the egg. Whatever it is.
Go balls.
Let's not refer to it as laying.
It's not.
I don't
an
want to
egg
really
guy.
picture that.
No, you know what? I'm pretty fine with saying Gold Balls lays the egg. I think that's the official term for the biological process involved here.
Yes, but not the egg guy laying the eggs. He's Go Balls.
Gold ball?
Yeah, that's his name.
That is his name.
That is his code name.
Please stop making me say that.
Well, see, and this is the thing. Like, Bendis created this character as a mild, dirty joke. Like, he wanted to see what he could get away with in a Marvel comic, and apparently the limit of what he could get away with was the name Gold Balls. And
so Gold Balls laid the golden eggs. Oh God! And then those are not viable, apparently. Like, those are just eggs.
They're the kind of eggs you make an omelet with.
Yeah,
giant mutant eggs laid by Gold Balls.
Okay. And then Proteus makes them viable. Someone injects the DNA that we have seen Mr. Sinister produce, kind of keep track of. And then what happened? Then someone else does something.
And then Alexa gave it life to kickstart the life.
Yeah, it's like, it increases, that kickstarts the life. Then someone does something with the time.
Yeah, Eva
does, Eva accelerates the time, and then finally Hope, gives it hope or life, and then they're born. Right?
No.
I read it twice, you guys.
Well, I mean, Hope basically, I think, is the one that ties all the powers together so that they work in conjunction and make the resurrection happen. And
i.e. giving the life.
Yeah. And she's the only one with appropriate medical training to hold the syringe, apparently. Is what why wouldn't Elixir do it and then just rub his finger over to be like, pinprick healed? No, it's gonna be Hope. Hope will deliver these. Elixir's way too busy being a himbo behind the scenes, apparently, to be trusted with the biological samples.
And then
let us just let you know, Elixir is a major himbo. Okay, prepare. Hopefully Hickman takes his past reading as continuity.
So, and then Professor X does his Bowie dance, that he has to do. Yeah, exactly what Peter's doing. And then all the information from the Cerebro, it's like a memory dump. As you do when you get a new iPhone, you have to dump all your phone photos and everything. And then the mutants are born again, right?
Yep.
This is more or less the process in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So here's the thing I want to immediately dig into, because it's the one thing I've been thinking about a lot. And I mean, you can tell from the different backdrop, I've been up to some stuff these past few days, right. But this has been stuck in. So
sorry, I'm back.
This is Mora's plan. Does that mean Mora has tried versions of it with different mutants in the past and in this life and have failed? Like, are we meant to take as read that she has some experience with Gold Balls and Eva from prior lives? Because how would she know that she's going to nail it in like 10 if she didn't know she didn't have somebody to lay eggs. I mean, in all seriousness, he's the one power in this group that's not duplicated. So how does she even commit suicide by Wolverine in Life 9 without knowing about gold balls?
Yeah, I sort of took that as the reading here, that over the course of her previous 9 lives, she has assembled enough specific knowledge about these particular 5 mutants to know that these are the only 5 mutants who can work in combination to achieve this process.
So my question actually is that, because then later on we find out that the process actually there is a restriction to this process. There's only certain type, certain amount you can do in a day. It's very engineering, you guys, because I have written reports like this, which
and we'll see all of that when we get to the data page in detail.
Yeah. Right.
We got some stuff to hit first, I guess. Yeah.
No, I know. I mean, my question to that is that are they always being brought back to their peak power? Because that's what it was saying, that are they always brought back to their peak power with dumping the entire memory until the day they died? Like, what did you guys thought about that?
See, that's where I'm coming in and saying that Polaris is not Polaris, Jean Grey is not Jean Grey, because the Jean Grey in X-Men Red is not going to stand for what happened in this issue. She's not going to be like, no, this is not happening, because I feel like I feel like there something was done to the X-Men, and then they were reborn into a particular time that makes this whole thing works. That Savior or maybe not Savior or Magneto, they purposely bring back the X-Men to a certain point in time where they can be easily controlled.
So I'm going to disagree with that, and I'm going to disagree because I think there is an implication, and this may be deliberate misdirection here, but I think there is certainly an implication based on what we're shown in this issue that this is the first real test case of this process being used in a major way. I don't think there had been a resurrection of a core X-Men team before. We've seen that he's brought back other X-Men before now. We saw Banshee, we saw the Cuckoos, but I don't think that we've seen on page any strong indication that people like Jean Grey or Polaris are not the selves that existed the last time we were reading about them in a comic. And it could turn out to be the case. But at this point, I don't think it's anything more than speculation based on a sense that we don't like the way Hickman has written them.
But it's also, I'm thinking that it's because the data dump that he's doing on them is also selective. So he's allowing only them to have selective memories. So some of the development you were talking about of these characters have been erased.
So I don't know. Yeah. But you sound like you're something to say, Peter.
Well, I would say this, and we're into the data pages. We're gonna have to come back for the other scene because clearly we're into them. There's enough reasonable doubt introduced in the data pages to leave Hickman room to go to these places. For example, in the first note on the first page, it says they've been limited to optimal aging, and that's in quote marks. So are we supposed to take the read as optimal aging is exactly the age where they died? Is optimal aging when they were in their peak physical condition? For mutants like Polaris, not saying that she's died and been made a pod person. I'm just using her as an example. For a mutant like Polaris, if she were to be brought back for a pod, wouldn't you want to bring her back from before House of M rather than after? Like, I just think he left enough room to encourage us to have these conversations. Is Hickman where's Freya? Is Hickman or Xavier selectively giving them memories? Maybe. Where's Tyler? Are some of them back already as pod people and we don't even realize yet? Maybe. What did Cyclops have 2 eyes all of the times we've seen him so far? So, but I also agree with my colleague Zach up there. Gosh, this is hard. That there's nothing to prove that is the case. Like I really think these data pages have been rules. Hickman got the lawyers to come back, and they've been rules lawyered within an inch of their lives to smack all the bad theories and be like, get out of here, but also to leave enough room for us to pull it apart like taffy with these new theories, some of which are going to get explored in the Dawn of X books.
No, but I think like the data pages here, the key things here are not the actual data. itself is the fine prints, which is like those stuff in the brackets. It's like, these are not important. Don't read them. They're in brackets. Like, you can ignore them. But those are the key things that he's trying to say here, I think. And
so these data pages, it's really funny because they look like just massive info dumps, but if you actually read them in a story context, they're basically just a list of red flags for why you should never attempt this process if you don't want anything to go horribly wrong. Like it is just way after way that things could go horribly wrong. Starting with the statement that while so far changes have been limited to optimal aging, designer modifications may be possible. Well, hell yes, they're possible. We actually know that they're possible because in X-Men Volume 2, Number 2, the issue that we've sort of pegged as the probable moment of the Magneto-Moira-Xavier schism, that is the reason that Magneto has his schism with Moira. She did modifications to his DNA when he was being re-aged to an adult to try to make him not evil. And she said that she specifically did that because she was trying to make her son's DNA more stable. And we see now that this is the retconned reason why. Her son was more important to this mutant resurrection plan than Magneto was ever going to be. But right off the bat, that's something that can and has gone wrong already. And like just a list of all the other things that could go wrong, multiple downloads into different husks of the same mind, so that there are different people with the same mutant mind and soul walking around. Body swapping, where you put a mutant's mind and soul into another mutant's husk. They say that it hasn't been done, but it clearly can be done. And on that same page, we're told that Proteus actually has the body of Charles Xavier. So clearly it already has been done. We're being lied to on that page.
No, okay, on the point on Proteus, when I first read it, I came to the same conclusion. Like, one paragraph ago, you say that this is happening, and then the next paragraph, you tell me that this has not been done. But the fact is, Proteus was not regenerated, not resurrected in this case. Proteus is just taking the husk because he needs body as food. And so the husk is created as an empty husk as food for him.
Right,
so,
but it's not the body. Yeah, it's not the body of Kevin McTaggart. And that same page says that it hasn't been attempted to put a mutant soul into...
No. But that's what I'm trying to say. That one is Proteus' power, and one is the process of resurrection.
Yeah, I think we're getting there now. So he does need a mutant body to hop into optimally. I don't know where that came from. It seems that's what they're saying. We've seen him in human bodies before, but maybe that's Hickman's new fanwick. I don't know. But they're only making them out of Xavier. Is this like a Xavier? It's kind of almost got like drink of my blood, eat of my body kind of thing to it. Like where Xavier's like, take from me, that's okay. Don't take from any other mutant husks, which is totally in line with how creepy Xavier is in this entire process. And
because we are skipping, we are not going sequentially. This point is supposed to be my exhibit 3. So just remember that exhibit 3.
Let's rewind the tape, shall we?
Let's rewind it back.
Yeah, Free, get us back in order. Come on, producer.
I got very excited about that whole engineering report over there, so I kind of moved ahead. So we forgot to talk about all the sexiness that was happening in this issue, because this issue was so sexy, you guys. I mean, my goodness. So when all these people were finally born, the first thing that Xavier does is that, puts their powers in, and they're all born. And Zach, did you have one point that you wanted to make about there's one panel that really took you really loved?
Well, I just want to say that panel showing a naked Logan tenderly lifting a naked Scott to his feet is the Wolverine Cyclops interaction that I think their character development has been leading to for the past 4 decades at least. And I think that's the scene we all deserved.
And while that was happening, Nightcrawler was looking rather jealously. I saw that too.
I'll bring it up on screen because clearly we need to orient you to where we are in the issue right now.
I was looking at that, but yeah. So they all came back, and then all of a sudden, Storm. Oh, hang on. We're gonna show this because this is very important that you see. Like this, right over
That is just
as you can see.
Look at the tenderness.
Ever so gently lifting him out of his egg. It's like they've practiced this move their whole lives.
Where Jean is like totally across the room, like, yeah, whatever. Like,
well, like this is not the first time she's walked into a room where this is happening. Just Wolverine lifting Scott out of his egg. All right.
So leaves you the question: did it happen to them before, or But just look at that panel, though. Everyone is looking so. It's like equal opportunity sexiness all around. Everyone is just naked, just there. And then Aurora comes, like Storm comes in. It's like, okay, we don't have time for this. We need to present your, this nude creations to rest of the mutants. And then it became very, very cult-like.
Yeah. So before we even jump to that part, right? I assume everyone
that part,
those parts. No. I'm just saying that did everyone notice the sinister diamond in the syringe?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's his DNA files, and we're told that on the data page.
Yeah. So I thought that was pretty.
He negotiated to get his logo in there. That was
I was about saying that he has not joined Krakoa at that point in time. But
he doesn't show up until the end. But
yet they are using a syringe with the diamond on it. So I'm like,
branding is important, guys. We know it. We at HiX-Men Report, we know
whether you are Sinister or Xavier or us, branding and logos are important.
As it's very important.
But isn't that like a red flag for you?
Well, I mean.
No. Frankly, no. We knew that they were working with Sinister. Like, we knew that was a part of the plan since last issue. That part is not coming as a shock. Whatever else Sinister may or may not be up to, and it's Sinister, so he's up to something. That part may turn out to be a surprise, but the fact that they're using Sinister's DNA and his branded logo syringes is not a surprise.
No, the syringes is the part that I thought was a little bit weird. And then, and before we get to the Aurora part, when Xavier, imparts the so-called soul into the husk, the flare again, that looks like the librarian symbol.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the librarian in a little bit more depth when we get back to the data page, but I think there is more to say about that.
Correct.
One thing that I think we should say now, just about the process of this resurrection, is that in describing it, Hickman is pretty explicitly conflating the soul, which he calls anima, which is an Aristotelian term. It's the animating spirit, the breath of life, with the mind, or suke, or psyche. It's, as far as Hickman's definition here is concerned, those two things are the same. Whether or not that assumption is going to be challenged at some point in future X-Men comics remains to be seen, because that is not the only way that you could define what a mutant's soul is, but that's how it's being defined here.
Yeah, and the flare is my Exhibit 1.
Yeah. Well, and also I know we're not going sequentially, but this art is the actual art from the intro of House of X #1, just with lettering over it. So please award yourself several points if you knew from the beginning that Cyclops was the bod person who was popping out of the egg.
That's her. She said that.
Did I say that?
And for everyone playing at home.
You said that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I said that. Yeah, guys. Okay. See if I remember things from like 7 weeks ago, or however many weeks that it has been. But the thing is, one thing I wanted to say that is, as soon as Cyclops came to be, his first question was, did it work? So he was aware of this, before he went, he definitely was aware of this, because he seemed to be, he just shaking it off. It's he knew that this was going to happen. And also when we go back to data page, I have a point about that. But yeah, so then they're all presented with all their bits and parts and everything, as Tyler said, to this whole mutant population. And Aurora goes into the biggest hype woman that's ever been, with her full-blown preacher mode, introducing each of them while they're
before she even introduces them in particular, it certainly is full-on preacher mode, and this is some of the most sort of explicit religious language and some of the most explicit comparisons to Xavier, especially as a messianic god figure that we've seen so far. Because the things that she's saying, she refers to the great work of the Five, for they have righted the wrongs of man and defeated our great enemy, death. That is almost a direct quotation from the New Testament. That comes from the books of Corinthians and Timothy, both of which describe Jesus as having conquered death. And the 5 is probably a reference to the 12 in the New Testament.
Yeah, you can't just go with the 12 in X-Men comics, because then things get messy.
Right. Well, I know the term is but
you can throw out the 5 too, because there's a Phoenix 5.
Yes. What I'm getting at is that what we usually call the 12 apostles is actually usually just called the 12 in the New Testament. So this idea of the 5 who are working miracles of resurrection in the name of our Lord Charles Xavier is a very clearly messianic image. And this is about as heavy-handed as Hickman has been with that so far. And for people who have seen the solicits for the first issue of the upcoming New Mutant series, it actually talks about them spreading the good news in space while they retrieve their friend Cannonball. And good news, of course, is the translation of the word gospel. They are literally spreading the gospel of Charles Xavier, through whom you will not die, but gain eternal life.
Yeah.
So is 5 the number 5 a very important X-Men number? Because there's always 5. Like there's Bendis is OG 5 and over there.
Yeah.
Well, it was the number of original X-Men. And I do think that if we go back and think of that Sinister Secret from the last Powers of 10 issue, where he talked about the fittest of all mutants surrounding himself with a particular numbered entourage, I think we can look back in retrospect and say that that was probably a reference to Xavier and his 5.
Really though? Because then that comment about getting rid of them if the originals were back together, but the original X-Men wouldn't run the machine the same way.
Yeah.
No, that is quizzical, but I think in the light of this issue, I am wondering if we are intended to read it that way.
I got you. Basically, like, yeah, maybe members of this 5 can be replaced, but it ain't going to be the same.
Like Sinister seeding discontent among the 5 by suggesting that they're not really the ones that Xavier wants to have around.
Yeah. Oh, and I have more to say about that in a few pages, but there's more to say here. Tyler, what were you about to say?
No, well, I'm just saying that the reader, the reader actually has something about the one survival of the fittest. So I don't know if that fits well for Xavier here. So,
well, he calls him the fittest of all mutants.
Yeah,
which could just be a reference to how damn good he looks in that black jumpsuit.
Well, so the other thing is that the subtitle, right? I mean, are we going to move on to the next page where the subtitle says "Here they come," and
when I read that, all I could hear was the Monkees theme song. Does anybody else here they come, walking down the street? Right, that's the Monkees. Wherever they go, hey, it's that's all. That should have been the bumper music. Sorry, I failed you.
Why was that? Okay, you know what? I cannot believe. Peter, time out. Anyway.
No, but that's that refers, initially, I think it was meant to invoke like, they are coming back. But I think it also refers to something that happens in the 3rd act of this book.
Okay, one more from me before we move on, although you guys might have more. So I want to talk about that thing that both Zach and Tyler were talking about with Cyclops coming back, and Freya mentioned, he says, did it work? So my read was that Jean was broadcasting because they wanted to have the backups of their mind from as close to their death as possible. And that's why it was important that Jean had to survive. That was my read as of 2 weeks ago, right? But now I wonder, because Cyclops knew that it worked. He had already made it work when he was killed in the last issue of HiX, right? Because Wolverine and Nightcrawler had already released the external hatch and he was in communication with Jean about leaving. So is this actually a Cyclops backup from before he left on the mission and he doesn't know what happened on the mission? Because not only is this interesting or not in terms of the plot of this issue, but there's also this idea of like Xavier commissioning people to do stuff and then them meeting an unfortunate end, which they don't actually recall. Like there's some really interesting nebulous stuff in there that I bet X-Force is going to be exploring in the Dawn of X.
I mean,
But sorry.
No, I mean, my read is really that he did not know he died. He did not know that. Oh, I mean, he knew he died because he's just rebirth. I mean, he just came out of an egg, of a gold egg.
As one does. I mean, as we've established, that's happened with him before.
Yeah. So, so for him, it's like I don't think he knew what happened in what's the station
Souls
called?
no
Forge.
Yeah, the Forge.
Yeah, so he didn't know what happened in the Forge, and whatever Xavier put back to him is probably a few hours before the backup, or even like 24 hours before, where he was preparing to go.
Oh, so there was a delay in syncing, you guys.
Well,
Zach, you were pulling some faces while I was having the explanation. Do you have anything you want to add there?
No. I think it's not clear. I mean, we haven't really seen any of these people have much interaction except with Storm during their presentation to the crowd. So we don't really know what they know or don't know. We don't know any other changes that may have been deliberately made to them or otherwise. I mean, there are a lot of mysteries yet to be resolved about what this process is and what it meant for them.
Well,
I
and
think just,
it also
go ahead.
It also explains. No, I'm saying it also explains like why Xavier's were crying, because he was saying that even if I know I could bring you back, I still shed a tear because he's nice like that.
Well, and also because death is death, and I think that there's an interesting thematic thing going on here, where I think a lot of people read this plot turn and felt like Hickman has done this weird move of taking death off the table as anything that means anything in comics. I think paradoxically, he's actually doing the opposite. He's highlighting the fact that death in comics, and especially in X-Men comics, already meant nothing. It was a revolving door. And by lampshading that fact and actually making it the central fact of this new status quo, he actually gives it more significance, because now there's room to deal with questions of, what does death mean if you can and will die repeatedly and come back? What is the trauma of going off on what are effectively suicide missions and dying again and again and again? What does this resurrection mean? Is it really you? What kind of pain do you continue to feel through what you've been through? These are all real questions now that there's a lot more room to explore with this status quo on the table.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it automatically colors the things that we just read in House of X4, where like Nightcrawler and Wolverine's conversation, they knew that they were going to get put back in their bodies, but they still were talking about what happens to their consciousness and to them after death. So I think there's clearly sentiment even in the story among the mutants.
Well,
about what it means to die.
Well, or the conversation that Cyclops has with Xavier and Magneto in House of X #3, where they're asking him if he's confident in what he's doing, and he says yes, but is it so wrong to have doubts? And they have to reassure him that he won't die as long as he as long as he's remembered, and nobody forgets the founder of a nation. Well, does that mean that the Cyclops who was having that conversation really is dead, and there's just another Cyclops who has the same mind and, in quotations, the same soul walking around somewhere? We don't know. That Cyclops didn't know, because these are metaphysical things to which there was no answer for him.
Sorry.
Do you have someone to introduce to us?
We have a new mascot. This is Lady Darkholme. Say hi, Lady Darkholme. Hello. So she's really upset that I'm not in my usual position, so she could actually sit on me and nap. So she's really giving me signals. Go away, girl. But anyway, so I was gonna say that what was I gonna say? Oh, I mean, it's just I know I'm saying it again and again about the phone metaphor, but the thing is, like, even if you download all your past memories, notes, and phone photos and everything, is it still your old phone, or is it a new phone?
Yeah, just because it's the same data doesn't necessarily mean it's the same person, even though we're told on these data pages that it is.
Because if you look at iPhone, for example, Apple, if you want to sponsor us, go ahead. All Apple phones look the same. It functions differently. It has all your same memories, and it's gonna continue to have the same memories, but it's the same phone.
I'm also convinced that one of these days, Cerebro is going to start doing an auto update while the X-Men are in the middle of a dangerous mission, and we're going to lose an entire team. Like, we're never going to see them again, just because.
Because it's like, oh, auto update, time for an update, shut down, and do all that. And also, like, it's kind of like the whole resurrection and everything. It's very Moira's power-like, you know, because Moira can do this automatically, and that has been replicated. So, I mean, you guys were talking about, you know, how she knew about gold. These 5 people combined can bring a life together, maybe because she also knows the process of regeneration or resurrection. So she found those mutants to combine the process. I don't know.
I mean, Zach, can we do our Life 11 theory now? Is that a good enough tickler for the Life 11 theory?
Sure. Let's dive into the Life 11. You want to hit that, Peter?
Sure. Okay. So Zach and I had this very conversation as we were reading the issue that Faria almost word for word, and I said, "Oh my gosh, this is why it's like 11 lives if you're lucky." Because Moira's 10th life was going to be it for her. Something was going to happen to make it so that she either her power runs out or her status changes. Who knows, right? But she'll be reborn into 11th life through this process. That's why it's the lucky one. It's as all Destiny hints, it was a riddle. It was about her having to figure out how to give herself another life without dying. And maybe she'll be put back in the egg without mutant powers. Who knows?
Which is an idea that, if it turns out to be true, would be a really great thematic full circle. Because Moira started this series as a human pre-retcon, she would end this series as a human post-retcon in life number 11 by being resurrected through one of these gold ball eggs.
Yeah. And Destiny loves cryptic shit like that. That is so on brand for Destiny.
It seems right. And if Hickman isn't planning on doing that, I hope he watches this episode and reconsiders how he's going to cap off this Moira story. There's still time, Jonathan. There's still time.
And we have a number of other notes.
Yeah. I mean, this plays a little bit into my exhibits.
Oh, tell us about your.
No, it has to go all the way to the end because there are a few more exhibits that I want to present.
Okay. So I will make you a deal. I'll allow you to present your next exhibit if you allow me to drop one more Bible illusion from this issue.
Go ahead.
Can we strike that? Can we strike that Faustian bargain?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So this actually goes to the role of like what might Krakoa's place be in this entire process, because it does seem, I think you have a case that Krakoa seems a little bit superfluous to what's going on with the 5. Like, is this just the location that they happen to have set up so that it's essentially a womb, a place where they're safe? So one biblical allusion that does stand out, we've seen of Book of Genesis imagery all over the place. And in the story of Eden in the Book of Genesis, there were 2 trees that Adam and Eve were told they could not eat the fruit from. It was the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the reason that the serpent in the garden gave them that they weren't allowed to eat from that was because if they got those 2 things, eternal life and knowledge of good and evil, they would be like God. And that would not fly, and so they would have to be banished from Eden. This Krakoan tree that we've seen these eggs hatching under, that is, for all intents and purposes, our tree of life. That is where mutants gain eternal life. And tree of knowledge of good and evil, well, we saw way back in Powers of X number 2 that Magneto was asked who decides what's good and evil, and he says, me. I do. So these are 2 things that have been explicitly now ascribed to Xavier and Magneto, respectively. Eternal life and knowledge of good and evil. They have taken on the powers of God. And we know what happens then. You're expelled from Eden, just like in Paradise Lost, which we saw quoted in a Powers of 10 issue. So Hickman is playing with these Eden images all over the place, and they're all leading up to a sense that eventually, not necessarily in Hoxpox, but eventually, there will be a fall. This kind of taking on the powers and the role of God will not be allowed to stand.
Peter, do you remember what the solicitation for, I think, the Powers of 10 6 says?
I certainly could
I think it says something about the fall of.
That's right. The story of mutant kind's fall.
Yeah, I think that's one of the
it's
things.
Interesting that it's Powers, because Powers hasn't given us a whole lot of present day plot development, unless it directly continues from a prior scene. I still think it's crazy that Powers goes last. It feels like we'll see. It's gonna be.
But that's
really
the red issue. That's the next red issue, I think. Yeah, Faria, you have something to say?
No, I was going to say that is this egg hatching only can happen in Krakoa, or it can be anywhere else? Does Krakoa has any effect on this business?
That's my next point, actually. I think, firstly, talking about image, how beautiful is that drawing of the tree? I mean, the coloring, the lighting, I think it looks really, really nice. But I think the whole image here, everything here is kind of just symbolism. I mean, Go Balls can lay his eggs anywhere he wants. The Five can resurrect anyone anywhere they want, but not necessarily under the tree, not necessarily, on Krakoa. At least I don't see anything that points to the fact that it has to be done at a particular location. Maybe it has to be done near the crater, which is the backup system for all the minds and memories. But I think everything done here is just as a symbol, and there is power in symbolism, especially for people in control. And I think this is what is happening here.
I think I honestly could see it going either way. I think what you're saying is a very strong case, and I think that this could be about they're being born on mutant land in a mutant place of safety for mutants. I think that that's entirely plausible, and I could see that being the case. I could also see Hickman pulling one last twist and saying that there is something about Krakoa specifically that is inherently involved in this process that was not described to us in Magneto's info dump. Maybe it involves wherever in the world Moira McTaggart is, because we still have not actually seen her. Maybe it involves the fact that we saw in our last Powers of 10 issue that Doug Ramsey infected Krakoa with a technovirus. It could be either of those things. I honestly don't know. I think that's a twist that we haven't seen resolved yet.
Yep.
And then talking about Sinister's one of his secret that he was talking about, that he have already done something, even though the certain bald one doesn't know about it. Is he also infecting something in the DNA so that parts of him is attached to these people or something? Because it has his brands and everything. I don't know. I mean, but anyway, something to think about. But we have to go to parading all these sexy nude people in front of other mutants, and then talk about, first there was this all we'll see them, and then she introduces each and every one of them, and then says that, oh, what is he or she, and then everyone chants mutant. Scene, I was kind of grossed out by it because these people didn't take a shower, and then she was just holding them, kissing them, and all that. I was like, this is just gross, and put some goddamn clothes on, first of all. But what was the thoughts? It was very, very culty and creepy as hell. Thoughts?
I mean, I agree with that. I agree that it is very creepy. I agree that it is very cultish. And I mean, my theory about the X-Men not being the real X-Men, I was thinking, at which point in time would Storm have this character, right? At which point in her life would she be this role of a cult leader? And I think, she could be one. I mean, she could fit into that role at the point right before Giant Size X-Men, because at that point, she herself is revealed as a goddess.
So I don't really agree with all of that. What fascinates me is that in reading and hearing the reactions that X-Men fans have had to this scene, there is almost a split right down the middle to how people respond to it. where some people will look at this and say it is incredibly inspiring and empowering and a statement of mutant strength and mutant unity and mutant culture. And finally, they have built their own nation and their own culture, and they're standing up for themselves. And other people will look at this and say, wow, what an incredibly creepy, cultish, overly churchy atmosphere. And I think that we are supposed to be able to read this both ways. I don't think that we have to come up with anything as complicated as saying that these are tampered with clones to say that they're behaving in ways that we don't think are in their character. I think that they're behaving out of character in the way that somebody who converted to a very new evangelical religion you hadn't heard of before would be behaving, quote unquote, out of character. These are people who are freshly converted and extremely enthusiastic about their new faith. And yeah, it's making them behave in ways that they have not before. But I think that's a deliberate narrative choice.
Please chime in.
No, I was just going to say, just like all the Republican politicians, when Trump became their, all of a sudden they became all weird at the same time, and Make America Great Again became a thing. So anyway.
Well, let me tie those two things together a little bit. So, how to put this? I think the thing that Zach hit on there that is the most interesting aspect to me is that it's a new evangelical movement. It's not based on anything necessarily. We've seen some mutant adjacent religions and social movements sort of in the past, but it's not like that this has like a big shade of any specific one that we've seen. And it's only been going on for about 7 months, but you have to, and so it's kind of like, that's part of the weirdness of it. Like, wow, they have this whole ceremony. Storm seems to have a very practiced way that she's saying these words. Like, when did this all happen? Who inspired it? How did they decide what the appropriate call and response would be, right? Because when you go to church or temple or wherever you go and there's a call and response, you know the response, mutants, because you've done it like 100 times and your parents did it and everybody did it. But here, it's actually seems as though it's had to have happened much more quickly. So I think that's like the really interesting thing. But there's very few real life movements where somebody's identity is so tied into the cult status the way that it is that these people here are mutants. There are a few, and I might get into some sensitive topics for us to draw those illusions. It's one of those times when the mutant metaphor can break down. But I think there's something really interesting to be said for this new thing happening and for people to feel compelled to take part of it, to experience the benefits of it.
And it didn't look like this is the first time this has happened.
No.
Like this has happened before. So the question is, because we were going to go back to the data page and talk about the production line that they have, that 200 people are made at the same time. Sorry, Darkholm is actually shutting down my computer.
Well, I think
maybe that was Mystique's mission.
I think there may be a simpler explanation, though, which is, in the same way, this sort of call and response pseudo religion that we're seeing here is not all that different from coming up with a language that all mutants would share as a statement of their culture, which we saw. And the reason they all learned that brand new language so fast is that it was downloaded into their heads when they came on to Krakoa. And so there's no reason we can't also assume that every element of these new cultural rituals were similarly loaded onto these new members of Krakoan society when they entered it.
But then you get to the question of why would he bother to do all of that loading, everything from the language to the rituals? Because Xavier himself, while he has agency, his agency is highly predicated on things that he knows from Mora. And so, then we have to take another step back and go, why does Mora think this is effective?
Well, because as Magneto told us back in House of X #1, symbols are important.
Yes.
And these are all symbols. These languages, these rituals, these things that they're doing, even though supposedly there are no rules, there are systems and there are rituals that give meaning to this new culture that they're building. And not just a culture, but we're explicitly told a society.
Yeah. And it reminds me a lot of Life 5. I know we tend to toss away Life 5 because we're like, whatever, Moran Zare made this utopia and then it got bombed by Sentinels. We treated it like it's the least interesting life. We were more interested in the life where she dies in a plane crash. But I actually think that this is what she maybe learned from that life. It suddenly seems so much more important.
Mm-hmm. And to be honest, all of this, this whole Krakoa thing is a very reminiscent, to me at least, is how USA has been born. Like, you know, the US, like if you look at the history of the United States, like people from different countries came here because they were persecuted, and now look at them. They have their own symbol, their own language, their own culture, and there's like a little bit of cultish behavior in.
Well, I think it's not just the U.S. I think he's universalizing here the process of how nations and cultures form. This is a sort of ethnographic way of describing what is the process of new cultures coming into existence. And the things you do are you come up with these new rituals, these new languages, these things that mark you as different from the other societies around you, and in so doing build pride and strength and confidence in yourselves as a society unto yourselves.
The reason I say US, because US is one of the countries where people came here to avoid persecution. And, you know, and then we talked about colonization before, and it's like they moved into another country, removed that country's already existing people's identity or culture, and then created their own, which is kind of what happened because Krakoa got invaded.
Well, that's going to be, I think, complicated a little bit in the final scenes of this, and the position that Krakoa has in all of this seems to be clarified a little bit more.
But I mean, if you really want to go with humans kind of analogy, wouldn't Australia be more appropriate?
No, yeah. Well, Australia was kind of like they were sent there because you know, they were sent there. People didn't run to it. If you know what I mean.
think we can say that it's a metaphor for nations forming and leave it at that.
Across many nations. I did have something I wanted to throw. Oh, so here's one more interesting thing to throw in there to the whole cult scene. Morrison was interested in exploring really similar concepts of what happens when you have a mutant group big enough to have culture, right? But Morrison wanted to talk about like the downstream effects of culture, like what happens after the culture has existed, and we're several iterative steps through the culture. So Morrison's introduction of that, and then all of the writers, what they took from it, it already had prejudices built in. It already had a caste system built in. It already had class levels between mutant haves and have-nots. From the very first issue, when Three-Faced Bob or whatever his name says, like, I don't have a pretty power, right? Like, not like you mutants. But I think what we're maybe about to see Hickman do is to say, well, let me show you how that happens. Let's show you what goes on when we go from 100,000 mutants globally to trying to increase that. Because right now, it seems like everybody's, right now that we get into the boober stuff, I think, because it's
I have a little bit more to say about that when we get to the very last scene.
Okay,
of this issue.
So I won't try to steal your thunder, but it does seem like the process of a society moving from a state of equality into potentially another state is something we're going to get to see.
So I want to just mention one more thing. As with all this introduction and stuff, the one that really stayed with me is Monet. Like, you know, her introduction is like, no touching, please. I'm like, thank God someone said it.
It's a very solid policy.
Yeah.
Like,
that was in character. That was hugely in character.
In character. Yeah.
Like, you know,
Well, and I think actually Hickman does his best to keep everybody in character here, because the Cyclops and Jean Grey scenes both are little callbacks to previous moments with those characters.
Yeah.
The conversation with Cyclops, where he credits Storm with her strength as a leader, and she says that she learned it from watching him, that is very reminiscent of their duel for leadership of the X-Men way back in Uncanny X-Men number 201, where they challenged each other. Yeah, when they challenged each other one-on-one to see who was right to lead. And Cyclops sort of slinked away after losing the fight in that issue. And this is really the first time that we've seen him acknowledge to Storm, yeah, you were tough enough to win that. You deserve it.
And losing to Storm that is powerless, who doesn't have her mutant power.
And Jean's answer, where she says, I'm the only me that ever was, she is quoting herself from the first time that she and Aurora met each other after Jean's resurrection post Dark Phoenix Saga during the Inferno crossover. So that is very directly looking back to the very close friendship that those two characters have had over the years.
Yeah, and then what is she going to say when she gets down the line to Mystique? She's my sister, that bitch. Like, what?
I think Mystique just needs to like stab her, and that's like, she's real. It's her.
It's her. She stabbed me right here in the back, just like usual. Right? It's just, Mystique is like really pointedly in those panels and really pointedly off to the side, which I think is like the artistic and writerly reminder that we still don't know why she was on the mission.
Right.
The thing is, I just want to say that the Storm's amusement as that touching, it just made the issue. It made the whole House of X parts of 10 for me. Just that one panel, like, because I've been using that as like current mood. Like that's it. Just I just wanted to mention that. I'm like, it needed to be mentioned. But anyway, so
no, I mean, hold on. It is also interesting that Monet's code name is Penance here.
Ooh,
which
tell us
is
why.
well, I mean, she has never used that code name ever, right? I mean, her code name is like M, or she's just Monet, right? She has never used Penance as
they called her Penance when she was in that form in her very tangled origin in the old Gen X series.
Right.
But she has not voluntarily gone by that name at any point in her history. But
Exactly.
Jean's going by Marvel Girl again, apparently. So everybody seems to have taken all sorts of variously inappropriate code names here.
And also,
Or
I
maybe
think
they were saddled with that. You know.
Well, it seems like Hickman's kind of sending a signal of like, you can't just go by your real name. Like,
Yeah.
that's over.
Well, we
Okay,
heard
Jean and Monet.
no.
Yeah, well, we heard people say that they have their mutant names. I don't
Yeah,
know
right.
why those particular characters would choose those particular names, but that's what we're being
Yeah.
told.
But that's part.
But the other thing also is that right before Storm addresses the crowd, for the male X-Men, she uses their code name. But for the female X-Men, she uses their real name. Did you guys notice that?
Wow, Storm is a misogynist. Just kidding.
No, I mean, it's probably nothing, but but it seems like a deliberate choice. Like right before she says what is he, she used Cyclops and Nightcrawler, and right before she say what is she used Jean Grey and Monet.
Well, I think there's also a level of Storm's familiarity. I mean, she says she calls Cyclops' brother Jean by her first name and Monet by child. So I think there's several layers in there,
not that
as
part.
opposed to like related to what the ritual is and Storm's personal relationship.
It's more the part where she shouts to the crowd, not the parts that goes before it. So
I don't know if there's anything deliberate in that. I am half inclined to say that Hickman might just have not been thinking about it enough detail.
Yeah. And this brings me to the Exhibit 2, which is where Magneto says something like, they should have killed us all when they had the
That actually
chance.
is later. Isn't that later? Oh no, you're right. They should have killed us all when they had the chance.
Yeah.
We have a certain lady in a pantsuit to talk about before we get there, folks.
Ah.
Yeah, talk about pantsuits. No, sorry. Sorry, that comes later. I'm sorry. No, so and the scene kind of ends like while all of this hula hopping going on. Xavier and Magneto has a quiet moment as two daddies, kind of just standing there and talking about that. Why I should be filled with hope. Why I have dread, and it's then they talk about the UN summit that's happening.
Well, but before we get there, that line that Tyler highlighted, it's actually, I mean, it's given to us as a pretty key moment because Magneto says that very portentous line, they should have killed us all when they had the chance. And then we get a close-up of Xavier giving a kind of subtle but visible smile. He is all in favor of this. And we've seen those two operating as a unit. And in as much as Xavier seems to be our Messiah of peace and Magneto is our Messiah of war, or the unarmed and the armed prophet in Machiavellian terms, Xavier is clearly okay with his armed prophet. Whatever it is that he knows Magneto's anger is going to lead to, this is all part of the plan, and he's good with it.
The other thing that someone actually mentioned. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
We can hear you.
Oh, sorry. Lady Darkholm is giving me a lot of trouble over here. Was saying that someone mentioned, I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting your name, but it was either in one of our comments. It said that Professor Xavier has a little bit of ladylike quality about him, the way he moves and stuff. That could this be Moira as well? This whole smile thing kind of reminded me a lot of that. Like it's a very much of a ladylike smile. I don't know.
Well, and
I don't know whether you gentlemen smiles like that. I don't know. Everyone smile like
No, but this is my exhibit too, right? Because who else have witnessed lives of humans killing mutants multiple times?
I'm not sure I follow.
Yeah, I don't get it.
Well, they say that they should have killed us when they had the chance, as in humans should have killed mutants or when humans had the chance.
Well,
So
you could be
who-
talking about any number of things. I mean, we saw that list of genocides a couple of years ago showing the extermination of 60
us
million mutants.
all, right?
Right, they should have left none of them alive, is what he's
Right.
saying. The humans who were killing mutants should have taken them all out and not given them time to rebuild their society on Krakoa.
Well, that's how you read it, but like, who has witnessed, lifetimes of humans killing mutants here?
I'm still not sure I follow this. I mean,
Yeah, you better just give us the
Magneto,
answer because the rhetorical's not working.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
Moira has lived through multiple lives.
well,
where
and Magneto's
humans-
seen them. He's seen them. I mean, they were projected into him in that scene where she and Xavier first recruited him on Island M.
Right, but why zoom in on Xavier's head? And
To
not
show
Magneto?
to show his approval, his surprising approval of what Magneto is saying, because that position, that antagonistic position against humans of they should have killed us all when they had the chance, has historically been the reason that Magneto is the arch nemesis of Charles Xavier. But we're being shown in that close-up panel that is clearly no longer the case.
Yeah, and that doesn't strike you as surprising.
It
No.
strikes me as surprising to the extent that they have clearly made an alliance. But I don't think that we need to assume that they are not they just because they're acting in ways that are new for their characters.
Well, I mean, then how else do you explain all these weird things? Like you use are you agreeing with Peter? Are you agreeing with Peter that Hickman is the bad writer here?
No, I'm saying that the point of this plot of this story is that this is a new day where they're trying new things. They're acting in ways that are supposedly out of character, specifically because these are new things that they're doing because nothing else has worked. And that's why at the end of this issue, we're going to see all of the X-Men's antagonists coming en masse to Krakoa's shores.
I just think we have to agree to disagree here.
All right. And also, one thing I want to mention is that Magneto looks significantly younger in his panels.
Oh, his
like,
age has always been all over the
Yeah,
place.
who
Yeah.
even knows?
He's 100 years old. He's 28 years old. No,
He's a baby.
According to Jordan White, nobody in X-Men is older than 25 years old. So who knows how old Magneto
He's
is?
given himself high in iron blood to his face to make it puffy. It's like not the mutant equivalent of Botox. Like, who knows?
Well, he's looking good. That's all I want to say. All right. So moving on. Then there was all this, like, as at the background, everyone is screaming mutant, and then they're all presented still naked, by the way, and still dripping
And
in.
people-
totally
people-
normal.
And people
Totally
reach
normal.
out to touch
Yeah.
them as if to just get a piece of the power bestowed upon them by the Five.
Yes.
Again, an extremely biblical image, just people wanting to make contact with this divine power radiating off of these mutants.
Do you
Right.
feel like Husk is there going like, how did I luck into this? Because it's like original 5, Wolverine and Nightcrawler, Monet, who has that high of opinion of herself on any given day of the week, and then Husk. Like Husk really did get the golden ticket to the golden egg in this particular.
Husk is the astronaut who's just like, I'm happy just to be chosen for the mission.
Yeah.
she doesn't know why she's there.
I have no significance to this whatsoever, but it's great.
And then here's the thing, like I want to mention that actually later on. So do remember Husk and remind me that, Freya, what did you want to talk about Husk?
All right,
Anyway,
yeah.
so after that we go on to the data pages. Is there more to talk
Oh
about?
God, I
in
hope
the data
not.
pages?
I have one more thing that I want to
Okay.
say about the data pages.
Me too.
Which is, I
Alright.
think it is an important detail that we're told that Cerebro will ostensibly manage to eventually download 16 million mutant minds, and it therefore must contain 16 million mutant minds in its system in order to rebuild the entirety of the mutant population. If we remember the scale of different civilization levels that we saw back in Powers of 10, that puts them on the Phalanx scale on Hickman's chart, which is a type 3 civilization on the Kardashev scale. And I think that may help illuminate what we may end up seeing in the X to the 3rd power timeline. Whatever life that's supposed to be in, we know that the mind that's been given to the Phalanx now contains Xavier's files, which means that it contains these 16 million mutant minds and souls. And in fact, if we look at the dialogue that the librarian has in their first appearance, it's pretty clear that what they're actually trying to do is access the mind and soul of what's her name, the Silabelle, so that they could retrieve and regenerate her, but they weren't able to make access to it. So now that the Phalanx have uploaded all of these 16 million mutant minds, is the end game here that mutants are going to be resurrected on a galactic scale via the Phalanx? Is that how X to the third power is going to end, with this giant Phalanx mutant population that is going to be very literally mutant machines, techno-organic mutant machines on a galactic-wide level?
Well, I think the wrinkle on that is that you're taking it as read that Cerebro would exist in this functionality in X3, but we don't yet know which life X3 is.
This is hypothetical. This is entirely hypothetical.
Yes, hypothetical. I would say more.
Let's say that X3 is forecasting into the future of this life. I think that would be an interesting and possible way for that plot line to resolve.
I guess my take on it is just the literal version of the figurative take, which is like, clearly this is Moira's plan because of what she learned from the Phalanx, however that connects to whatever past life. And yes, that's the goal. Like that they are eventually going to want to subvert the Phalanx or some similar universal technology, because why limit their resurrections to Earth? It's almost echoing what Coates has been doing in the most recent Black Panther run, where it's like, what if Wakanda did spread out across the galaxy? It's like, it's that same, what happens when the colonized becomes the colonizers. There's like a lot of interesting thematic stuff. And I'm sure that's where it's headed.
And also these questions of the separation between the husk, the body, and the mind and soul. Because remember, they were discussing the cost of giving up their physical bodies to place themselves in machines that could be taken in by this Phalanx intelligence.
Yeah, very similar to what we're seeing in this issue, talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the way I was reading it and processing it is that that has something to do with Moira's past life, and she's using those information here, as opposed to the other way.
So one of the things I wanted to mention is like these data pages written reads like something I have written about a certain process. Like, it's just like, it's very engineering oriented, like, and especially with the data of like how many, but like production line and process, how does it work and all that. So a couple of things that kind of brings to my, like, I wanted to discuss is like, is Professor X the only person who can do this actually? Like what happens if Professor X dies? Because he's the only one who can transfer, as of right now, the soul from the Cerebro to the husk, right? So there is no backup, right?
Right now, based on the data dump, no. But apparently any telepaths can do it if they know how to, or if they're strong enough. I think that's the implication here.
Right, in the future. But it kind of makes it surprising that we see him turn up in the UN in person. Like, you would think that he would be a little bit less willing to leave the island, given that.
Not only he showed up with the Cerebro in his head, like, he showed up with the machine. Like, he's not leaving that behind.
Well, he presumably has to keep it on at all times because he's constantly re-uploading every mutant who's alive on the planet.
Oh boy. So his literal iCloud. And the thing is, like, it also talked about that the limitation of like how it will take 300 years as of right now to make that happen unless they up the production, which is also something that I have written probably in past lives. Like I have written like, at this rate, we're never gonna get there. So the question is, how are they prioritizing them? Because, why is Husk being regenerated versus someone who is more worthy to be regenerated right now?
And what have they been doing with their 200? Let's say this has only been going on in full production scale for a week. Let's be like super, super lowball. That's still 1,400 mutants. So who did they bring back? That's more named mutant characters than we had.
Right. So I mean, it's how are they organizing this? What is the prioritization? How are they not like, oh, are you gonna stop 5 days, just like 5 days worth, like however many days of worth of production, just to bring back these 5 that you these people that you sent on a mission. And
well, good news for you. We've got another issue's worth of data pages that could answer that question in incredible depth.
Right.
Well, and how do you jump in line? Is that why Mystique is willing to do a side gig for Xavier, especially now that we know that Mystique survived it and he could have sent somebody else? Because she's looking for Destiny or maybe some additional people to be resurrected early in line.
Right.
But
right, so
I mean, the whole thing about this is like, you are not supposed, there's no mutant modification, that any product of temporal growth is susceptible to change, agents, and variations. You can introduce upgrades, extensions, and stand-ins. And you have, there's a cradle here. The concept of cradle as in like an offsite backup, server. There is actually a cradle very near House of X in Krakoa, in the original map. And then you deal with the thing that we spoke of earlier, that you have a mine and a husk, and they explicitly says that they cannot be mixed, or they have not experimented with mixing those, but it's just
they have. I'm telling you.
That's
my point.
Yeah, how do they know that they can't?
Yeah, like I said, these chart pages basically read like a list of red flags for why it should just end with a final note from Xavier saying, "What in hell was I thinking? We should never do this. This is a terrible idea."
Let's not do that. No, but that's not what we do as engineers, because we say that we shouldn't be doing it. Let's do this. When can we begin? Yeah, let's start a change management so we can all agree on this, and we're gonna do this. That's how we roll.
Well, I do think it's interesting, especially what Free is highlighting here as like our STEM person on the panel, is like there's been a shift in the way that these data pages are presenting information from a very dry, very factual, these are the numbers. Even in talking about the death, the only real sass we've seen in the pages was like the pretender comment, right? Like even when it is kind of funny, it's doing it in a very reserved way. Here in this issue, we're seeing brackets with brackets inside them. Like it's almost like it's coming a little bit loose. Yeah. And I definitely, I have to hope it was deliberate, because there's some choices in it that I'm like, wow, as an editor, like I would have, not even talking about like I would change that plot, like I would just edit this text differently. So I do think that there's some deliberate choices in the parenthetical nature and how rambling it is, and the way that it just like keeps interrupting it.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest giveaway is that one line that says, "Without this, we have nothing," which is the first time that the author of these pages has inserted themselves directly into it in a sort of panicked way. Yeah. Like this is their voice showing through in the clearest and most alarming way that we've seen in any of these data pages so far.
Well, and it almost works if you read the data pages as being like updated in the little X-Men wiki, the Xpedia sequentially, because we're coming right off of the No More. Like Professor X was shaken, or if you're me, delighted by what happened on that issue. And like that's changing the nature of the way that this data is being presented to us now. A little bit more smug, but also a little bit more frightened.
And did you guys notice like the advertisement for X-Force is actually inserted here?
There are a couple of things here. Yeah, this thing about force conventions with force in all caps, as if to tell us on sale at a local comic shop near you.
Dawn of X.
And in the bracket before that, saying it's expected that sooner rather than later, a mutant organization will be tasked with investigating mutant missing persons and suspected deaths. Mm-hmm. That sounds an awful lot like a revised X Factor investigations that we may or may not see in a future wave.
No, that's the description of what X-Force is doing.
So I'm not sure. No, it doesn't say that specifically. It's two separate notes. So that maybe
what I meant is that the solicitation of X-Force says that there's actually two groups. One is the field team and one is the data team.
Well, but I don't remember seeing in the solicitations that it says that they're going to specifically be investigating missing persons and suspected deaths.
which is why I'm saying that like this is kind of like Marvel's advertisement for X-Force. I mean, that's how I'm choosing to read this. So yeah,
I think it very well could be advertising two different comics.
All right. Okay. So that brings us to the United Nations, the where there's I think voting on Krakoa's status as a nation, and they're having everyone is like shaking hands behind, while meanwhile Lady Pantsuit, Emma Frost, and Charles Xavier is having a mind conversation where they're Charles is Emma is congratulating Charles for having a nation, and Charles is congratulating her for egging some of them on along the way, and so thoughts.
Well, here we have our seeding of yet another Dawn of X title, in this case, Marauders, which the deal that seems to be on the table here that Xavier is offering Emma in exchange for her mind control of the United Nations is going to be control of Krakoa trade via the Hellfire Trading Company. And that's going to be the backstory of our Kitty and Storm on a pirate ship book.
Right. And I just want to mention, just look at that Professor Xavier's outfit.
Like, I would wear that.
That is
Peter on HiX-Men report.
Immaculately tailored Krakoan suit, all natural Krakoan fibers.
Yeah. If black on black read better on camera, I would be wearing it today, but it just didn't read. So.
And it's a three-piece suit.
Yeah, a three-piece suit with with patterns on it. Like, how awesome is he looking?
If they did resurrect Jumbo Carnation, I can see why. Like, it may have just been for this meeting at the United Nations. Like, I need a suit. He jumps to the top of the list.
Yeah, I mean, Tom and Lorenzo would probably have some reads on the detailing on those pants, but it's still a really nice suit.
Oh, I love that suit. I just stared at that suit for a long time. I'm like, ooh, tell me more about this.
I just want the vest. So here's the thing that's interesting in this scene. Xavier, of all people, is telling Emma compulsion leaves an indelible mark on the victim. It also affects the one perpetrating the act. Now, we know that Xavier really likes to talk a big game about how he doesn't like to make people do things, but that game is mostly talk, because the walk that he walks is he makes people do shit all the damn time. And it just seems really funny that he has this little caveat that he dangles in front of Emma, and he's like, oh, but now let's work together. I don't know.
Well, he's also totally fine with what Emma did, and clearly sent her there so that she would do it. So I think that he's supposed to be, if not hypocritical, then certainly Machiavellian.
Yeah, it's like winkingly he's saying that, right? That was how you read it. That he's
I'm Charles Xavier, therefore I have to give this sort of moralistic lecture, but look, we both know where it's at right now.
Okay, that's where I was too.
If do what as I say, not as I do,
Except for really, let's all just do it. That's really what he's saying.
And also, I'm about to give you a giant corporate giveaway in exchange for the act of political crime that you've just committed on my behalf. So wink, wink, nudge, nudge, don't ever do it.
Yeah. Well, there's...
No, only do it when I tell you to. Otherwise, don't.
Well, no, it's plausible deniability. He didn't tell her to do it. He knew that she was going to. He likes that she did, and he's going to reward her for doing it. But he's got to go through the motions of saying, I didn't want you to do it. I didn't know you were going to do it, and here's why you shouldn't.
Right. You can't see my eyes, so you can't see the winking.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, he's just winking all the time behind the helmet, really, is what it's... I mean, it was interesting to me vis-a-vis the recent background of Emma that we've seen, both in Leah Williams' Emma Frost one-shot and in Matthew Rosenberg's Uncanny X-Men, that they've been really positioning her for a while with full knowledge of what's going to go on in Hickman's run as somebody who's willing to do whatever it takes in a similar way to Magneto or Apocalypse, but just with a different set of strategies, possibly more effective strategies, given some of the things that she gets up to in Rosenberg's Uncanny X-Men. And so it's kind of like, part of me was having trouble reconciling, like, why would Emma go along with this? Emma is one of the most mutinous possible people to have on your team when you're trying to engineer some kind of from the top down strategy, because she always wants a cut. Well, here's the cut. Right. Like it explains why she is putting her particular, very versatile set of powers and influences to work for Xavier. So this scene really brought it together for me.
Her cut was a monthly ongoing written by Jerry Duggan. That is a hard bargain at Marvel Comics, ladies
with
and
Storm and Kitty to put on the covers.
That's
too.
right. She struck a hard bargain.
Yeah.
And I kind of just love that page that's on display right over here. That as they're talking, her face is kind of different because she's actually doing other things. They're talking.
I love that.
Oh my God. Beast is trying to introduce her to this diplomat, but she's here talking, and then her face is just all I just love that whole page. Because there's one conversation going on, but a different things happening in the background. Only comics can achieve this for you. Like it just done so well. I just loved it.
I think Lars did a magnificent job on this whole issue. Honestly, I think we talk so much about the writing and not about the art, but it's stunning. It's so beautiful. Yeah. And Marta Gracia, the colorist, who we didn't get to mention the past few weeks, but he had a health concern and he's fine now. But he's not going to be coloring the last 2 issues. I believe David Curiel, one of Marvel's other best colorists, is going to do it. But Gracia's work here it's just stunning. Any little niggling doubts I had about it, and one with reflections or whatever, Gracia has just knocked out of my mouth because the coloring is just so stunning.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and we don't really talk about the comic issue itself, but the variant covers of this event, they are, I would say, 90% spectacular. Like
some of them have really crossed the line into like fine art. I think a few of them have.
I mean, like consistently, like you do get variant covers all the time, but some of them are like a little bit iffy and like kind of
they just have some cheesecake on them.
Throw someone there, But the whole series and every single one of them, no, I wouldn't say every one of them. I would say 90% of them, they look really, really good.
And I want to mention that police siren was not from me this time around.
It might have been me. I don't know what there must have been like a duck crossing the street here in Wellington.
I got loose. What happened? Like
I don't know. I'm in my new neighborhood now. It could be really rough here in my new cul-de-sac. It could be. Last night, my wife just said to me the other night that she was driving and there's this beautiful orange rabbit that just like lives in our neighborhood and it's stunning. And they're not native to New Zealand, so it's a bad thing. But we haven't been able to catch it. And she saw this rabbit being chased by a cat, and I was like, "That tonight's lead story." Giant orange rabbit being chased by black cat. Let's go to the scene. so, totally off the topic. I should turn the computer around so you can see the chaos. I'm in like a totally different house. I just like have dragged things into places to make this work.
And not to drag this part on, but like the whole thing about having 2 conversations at the same time. Another issue or book that have done this really well was Astonishing X-Men.
I was thinking that.
That one was like amazing.
Well, because Emma always facilitates these moments. Like it's a very Emma kind of trope.
It is.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings us to the mutant diplomacy, where it talks about all the nations, 100 nations have accepted the trade bargain with Emma, I believe, that who will be leading this. And then it's for a couple of other non-treaty nations who disagreed. Some of them are pretty much real life reasons, like, Iran, North Korea, Russia. They're not, it just feels like, I'm like, okay, really? You needed to put that? Then there's also Madripoor, like, fake nations like Madripoor, Latveria, are there as well. But the one that kind of got to my attention right away was Wakanda. And it says, region for rejection, they do not need mutant drugs. That was I could completely imagine Chadwick Boseman's T'Challa just saying that we don't need it. Like that's exactly, they literally say, we do not need the drugs. And they're like, oh, well, they don't need the drugs. And, just live with that. I mean, I could just see the Black Panther crossover in my head as I got like Coates loves X-Men. This is a documented fact. He likes writing Storm. He eventually will probably write for the X-Men franchise. Like in terms of Easter eggs, the potential Black Panther crossover just screams at me. The
Wakanda Krakoa War that climaxes wave 1 of these titles will be a very fun plotline to read.
Especially given what Namor has been up to in Invaders this year. Yeah.
And then Namor would be there at that time to save him.
Please, can we get Namor soon? I just need it.
Okay, this obviously goes on the page of notes that we're going to be faxing over to Jonathan Hickman at the conclusion of this episode, calmly and rationally explaining how this series should end.
Because now that Aurora or Storm has become like a full-time preacher, now T'Challa needs his lover back, and that's Namor. So yeah, that's how you introduce. I'm still going for that.
And to see the history of that conversation, tune into my channel where Free and I got into their lovers quarrel during Avengers.
It needs to happen. And also, like, one of the things I wanted to mention, just like, is this the first time they showed where Wakanda is in Africa? Because I never knew that's the location of
It's been established that it's on the western coast, or I'm sorry,
like,
eastern coast of Africa.
I think it had to be somewhere that Storm could have plausibly walked through around Kenya, given her backstory. I think they had to place it. It's like, if she's wandering around the eastern part of Africa, where could we put this country?
Although, isn't Black Panther's stepmother somebody who like immigrated from South Africa?
Africa, yeah.
Which is really much fun. I always kind of thought that Wakanda was more south, closer to where Madagascar is.
Mm-hmm. Somebody went on a long walk to run into T'Challa in their backstory.
Yeah, whether it was Mom or Storm.
You can still fly in Africa. There's still airplanes.
No,
guys.
but canonically, that is not what you're saying.
In these stories, those characters went on foot.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's because past authors were racist and didn't think you couldn't fly places in Africa. We're not saying that's not the case, folks.
No. Storm's backstory explicitly involves both airplanes and Africa. So it's clear that Chris Claremont was aware that aviation in Africa exists.
That is true, yes. People forget that Storm as a child grew up in New York for a few. People totally don't remember that.
Yeah.
Harlem, and then Cairo, and then Kenya.
Yeah. My question is more like, what happened to the Wakandians mutants? Like, which side would they choose?
Well, there's going to be a lot of that.
Oh, yeah. The question of the mutant diaspora and what choices they're going to make is something that we are absolutely going to see play out as this status quo goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure they would pick Wakanda. Have you seen their healthcare? What is Krakoa offering?
Eggs.
No, seriously.
Golden eggs.
Krakoa has no economy.
No,
they're only offering eternal life, infinite resurrections.
No, because if you want to know about Wakanda and healthcare, please read Ms. Marvel by G. Willow Wilson. There's a very, it's actually there. I'm not making this up. It's actually there. So and
we've seen that I have chosen good healthcare over commercial opportunity. So this is the thing that happens in the real world too.
And the thing is, and to the question on which side they choose, that was also a lot of choices that was given to Jewish people after World War II. You go to where you're gonna whether you go to Israel or anyway. So then that kind of brings us to the next portion, which is the kind of end where Krakoa welcomes all X-Men enemies, pretty much.
Here they come.
Yeah,
the mutant enemies.
Yeah, all the mutant enemies.
Only mutant enemies.
Yeah, all the mutant enemies are now welcome, and even though Wolverine is kind of against that, are you sure, Chuck, that you want to do this? And then it's yes, open the door, and they all came in droves, and it was actually led by Apocalypse, who was in the front runner. Also, for the first time, I realized he has 2 A's. One, 2 A's on him, all about branding once again, guys. I could not get over that. I couldn't see anything after that. And then he says that, well, we're here. And then
so clothing choices aside, I think we get a couple of major details from Apocalypse, whose entrance is clearly presented as the most dramatic of everybody here. The first is the reaction of Krakoa to Apocalypse's return, where he is flooded by these flocks of doves, these symbols of peace, which suggest strongly that Krakoa is welcoming him back. And we've talked before about ambiguity in what Krakoa's place in this settling/colonization scheme is. I think this is a strong indication that, at least by this stage, Krakoa is an active and willing participant in the plan. It wants Apocalypse back. It likes that Apocalypse is back. It has its champion again.
How do we know that? How do we know that Krakoa is not being controlled?
We don't know that for a fact. I'm saying that this is an indication that we're seeing here. I think that by no means everything is settled or clear. I'm just looking at clues as I think they're presented to us.
And it's also interesting to see that Apocalypse could apparently speak to Krakoa.
Yeah, Apocalypse knows the language of Krakoa. Yeah. It's not just Doug. Apocalypse seems to be able to communicate too.
Speaking. I mean, as in telepathically, because
Well,
they did not show him speaking.
or maybe Apocalypse just understands the signals. I mean, if you're flooded with doves, it's a pretty clear signal from somebody.
You know what? Do not flood me with doves, because no, that's a no.
That goes along with no touching. When Freya comes to Krakoa, don't touch and don't flood with doves.
And also, look at just how delicate his body line. Look at his pinky raised from the rest of the hand. Like, these are Polaris is one of the foremost artists in superhero right now, and he is making some very deliberate choices with Apocalypse's body language in these panels.
Well, and we continue to see our reformed and redeemed Apocalypse looking more and more like not only a hero, but right here a gentle hero, like a hero with like truly the protagonist in this story.
And so the thing is, like, this Apocalypse has anything to do with Life 9? Does he remember, has memories, or
depends on if Mora's been to visit him or not.
Yeah, we do not know. We do not know. And I mean, the other big thing with Apocalypse, of course, is the oath that he takes. This swearing of allegiance, where he says, "We submit to the laws of this land, be what they may, and acknowledge that from this day forward, we all serve a higher purpose than want or need," which, you know, we talked about the Buber philosophy that Hickman was drawing from, and what I had brought up before of this scheme of moving from eternity to liberty to equality and bounty fraternity. This is a very, very clear statement of fraternity. This is almost a paraphrase of Martin Buber. It comes very close to the way that Hickman himself describes fraternity in Red Mass from Mars, where he says, a collective of individuals dedicated to the betterment of each other, a brotherhood of all men. It is you, it is me, forever. So that really is, now we are being told that Krakoa is the model of fraternal society. Everybody gets to preserve their own soul. We've seen that they keep their own souls, and yet they are all there for a higher purpose. They're there for the cause of each other, not just to serve want or need.
Well, you also, to me, I think is also Hickman saying, you think reforming villains is cool? Well, this is cool. I mean, that was one thing that I was sort of like reading into it. I said, you know, because X-Men have a history of like accepting villains into their mix, you know, starting with Rogue, and then, you know, you have Emma, you have Sabretooth, you have Juggernaut, you have, like, you know, all sorts of villains have joined them, and then, you know, maybe became villains again, and then now we have like the whole bunch of them coming in together.
Well, I have three little tags on those two comments. So one to Tyler's is, I think it was important that we had to see the villains all kind of submitting in terms of the oath. You don't get that as much with these other reformations, like Emma's reformation or Rogue's. They come kind of like begging, and the begging is taken as the submission. But because they're kind of accepting with open arms, there needed to be a device both in the story and just like in general to show the submission. We'll see if that holds true, right? So there's that. But also I think that this scene, which to me felt like it could have been the end of all of House of X and Powers of 10. Like, maybe that's why I had the feelings I had about this show. I'm just like, okay, well, here we are. But clearly more things are going to happen. We have 3 more issues. But it pays off 2 very specific moments in the first issue. One is that we see the whole, the wider scale of Emma extraditing Sabretooth and Cyclops saying that we're going to deal with Sabretooth later in our own way. Like, this is the plan, that they're going to swear fealty or else. And now we see just how big the tent can be. There are some terrible murderers in this scene. But 2, the Omega list, because look who inviting everybody to the island got them back. It's Exodus, who's one of the other Omega mutants, which surely they would want to have a hold of for what kind of plan they have. So I think that that's why this is not the end of the series, because there's like levels upon levels here. And one of the levels is like, well, what do we get if we invite all the mutants back? Do we get some people who have been lost from the fold who could be useful to us? It doesn't just have to be Omegas. We saw that with Goldballs and Eva Bell. Who else do Xavier and Mora need to get their hands on for whatever phase 2 of this plan is? And so I kind of like, yeah, there's villains on the shore and it's fun and the art is utterly amazing, but there are definitely several layers to this scene in terms of the story that Hickman is telling.
So I think that that's totally true, and I think that we also should probably note at this point that, you know, yes, there are enough issues left, and there are enough red highlighted issues left that Hickman clearly has another Scorpion sting or 2 left in him, and we have not seen the last twist here. But at the same time, we have turned a corner where a lot of what we're seeing is set up for the long game. That while there are elements of this that surely are going to be resolved as a mini-series in itself, there are other elements that are there because this is going to be the next at least year of X-Men comics. And we shouldn't expect to see it all wrapped up. I mean, a lot of these villains arriving on the island, I'm not sure that we're going to see payoff to whatever could go wrong or will go wrong in the 3 issues before this is going to end. That could happen 2 years down the line.
I mean, especially you have Empath here. That's one thing. And I mean, I do have one question though. Is Black Tom one of those figures that walked in? I wasn't thinking that it's him, but I think I was just Googling just to make sure that I got everyone correct. And someone mentioned that Black Tom is one of them, which kind of does not make sense given his role as a Sentinel.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think we've seen some people come along with the villains that I would have been invited through other means. Like, even if Frenzy has had another heel turn relatively recently, I still think she's like in the good books more than the bad books, but we see her here lined up behind Apocalypse swearing fealty, even though she's been a full-time X-Men. So I didn't read a whole lot into if somebody arrived now or not. I think the fan wank of that is Sage being like, oh, wow, we're letting a lot of people through before. We've never done that. Like, that's kind of what it is. It's just the first open call where there's been somebody other than like Jean to escort people.
And we don't really know what's spelled out in the script and what's just sort of an artistic judgment call. So I don't know that I'd read too much into these crowd scenes, especially.
So can we actually show the very last scene? Because
sure.
You know, because I'm gonna say that truly took my breath away. Like
that final splash page.
The final splash page.
And Hickman does not do a lot of full page splashes. So when he does, it actually lands pretty dramatically like this.
Like, it was just, I just needed that to be like, you know, its own thing. I cannot wait to see the oversized copy of this, because, you know, that whole thing, like, you know, welcome home. And it just like Apocalypse, like the two least, like, you know, the two people you would never expect are shaking hand, and, you know, create like, it's just like a dun moment. I just loved that.
And I mean, I totally agree with you. And actually, this is my exhibit 4.
Well, I thought you had 3. Where did another one come from?
This particular scene is my exhibit 4.
You think that that's also out of character?
No. So my exhibit 1 to 4 here is my theory that Professor X is actually Moira in Professor X Husk. So the exhibit 1 with the flare that looks like the librarian. So my guess is that librarian figure is actually one of Moira's consciousness in Life 9 that survived that end that we saw, and she continues on to the end. So that's what I'm presenting as exhibit 1. Exhibit 2 is when they zoom in on Professor X, when Magneto says those, you know, they should have killed us, and she has actually witnessed those happening in several lifetimes of humans killing mutants. And then the exhibit 3 is in the data page itself, saying that the Husk and Mind can be different, even though they explicitly says they have not experimented on it. And exhibit 4 is Moira welcoming Apocalypse back home, because in Life 9, Krakoa is the home of Apocalypse and all the X-Men.
But yeah,
that's my theory right now.
I'd say it's possible. I would not go so far as to say it's plausible.
That's why I say it's a theory, and I'm presenting evidence for it. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing: all of those exhibits, regardless of how the theory ties them together, points to that it's absolutely riveting to think about where Moira is right now and all of the other things Moira has done that we haven't seen. Like, all of these exhibits almost all hinge on how unknown. I mean, Hickman did this thing where he showed us the ball under the cup, put the cup back over the ball, and he's been rearranging cups this whole time, and we just truly don't know.
Don't know.
And I think we're about to learn a lot in the next couple of Powers of 10 issues.
I think that, if anything, is the story that will be resolved in House of X, Powers of 10. I think fundamentally this is the story of Moira MacTaggert, even though she's been off screen for almost all of it.
Yeah.
And I think that while many of these things are seeding the future, that's something that we're going to see tied up.
Mm-hmm. And Faria, you wanted us to remind you about Husk.
Oh, I already talked about it.
Oh, you got it in there.
Yeah, I talked about it in the sense like whose position was moved in order to bring Husk back. If you know what I mean.
Who got bumped for Paige Guthrie?
Yeah. I mean, it's an important matter to me. Okay, priorities is a thing that it matters to me. Like, it's like, if you were in line, why are you cutting it, sir or ma'am? That's what I wanted to talk about. So this issue ends with, if you are us, then be with us. Come home, Magneto.
Another reminder of that quote. There is no longer any you or I. There is only us. Which is another reference to Martin Buber's I and thou, thinking of each other as a unified thou instead of separate individuals.
Right, and I thought it was like very threatening. Like, if you want to be with us,
it's that too, because the opening quote drew a distinction between us and them. So the us is also a way of othering everybody who's not a mutant and not on Krakoa.
Right.
Also sounds like it could be like a great like Destiny's Child lyric. Like, if you want to be us, then be with us. Like, it's just.
I think we all know that Destiny's Child in this context is Rogue.
Thank you.
So let's go around the final thought. Zach.
I liked this issue, and I liked this issue almost despite myself. I concede that on the merits, it's actually written quite dryly, and the data pages are absurdly extensive, even by Jonathan Hickman standards. But I think that the status quo he's setting up is so interesting, and the ideas that he's exploring are so compelling, that I'm willing to forgive those failings in construction and execution, because I'm just interested in seeing where this is going. I think that the ideas are really good and they do feel new. So I liked it.
I mean, talk about data pages being dry. This is my life. This is my job. But just wanted to say, Tyler, final reaction.
I mean, I love this. And with the caveat that I think some of the X-Men are written badly because they are not the real X-Men. I mean, if it turns out that they are, and the Hickman just can write a female character without regressing them into a teenager, I'm going to revise this to I am not quite sure I love it as much as I thought before. But I agree with Zach. I love the idea. Even if all my theories are wrong, I love all the seeds of the future stories that are planted here. Just in this one issue, it's a red issue. It's not as surprising or shocking as House of X issue 2. But I still think that it is really, really compelling for me.
Peter.
Well, you heard me a few weeks ago get into the struggle of like, am I an X-Men fan? What does it mean to say you're a fan of something currently versus something that's gone by? And it seems to hit me every time we get to a House of X issue. This didn't do anything for me. I know I'm having a very stressful, emotional week in other ways as we've been moving house and all this stuff, but I just found it very, very dry. Too dry, really, to hold my attention. It's the least I've reread any of the issues so far, and I just have this sense that like, I think reading a Wikipedia summary of this or watching a HiX-Men report of this is actually maybe more entertaining than reading the issue itself, which gets me into layers of like, we keep saying how great the artists are, but it almost feels like the art is like great despite how dry the issue is. Like, wow, what if they could work together? So I don't know. I mean, I know I'm the odd one out. I am always that 1% that doesn't like a movie that has a 99% positive Rotten Tomatoes, such is my lot in life. But I'm just so bored. I mean, I'm here because I love my fellow HiX-Men here, not because I like this issue.
So for me, I'm kind of like, as a new X-Men fan, I mean, new reader of this, I am enjoying all of it. I'm kind of big, and also because, I'm also a big Hickman fan, and I know how he's a long-form storyteller. A lot of the things that he sells, I kind of love it. I love grand ideas. I don't necessarily care for characters or, how characters are talking, which, there's a debate to be had whether that's important or not. But to me, it's the grand ideas. I love that idea, and I love that superheroes with powerful, superheroes with superpowers are dealing with these grand ideas of regeneration, what it means to create a whole new society, and how they're going through all of this. So I'm in it for that. And along the way, as a new fan, I don't have necessarily have a lot of connections to these characters. So even if the characters become different, I wouldn't know. I mean, I wouldn't know actually. So I'll probably going to like it unless it starts to become like, I don't know, some weird things.
Well, unless they all get, they
regress back to
to the
mopey.
poor me mopey X-Men.
But anyway, well, and the thing is, like, we're not gonna know. There's a good chance we're not gonna know until the year 3 or whenever he's done. It's just, and anyway. So with that, we're gonna be back next week with Powers of X. Yeah.
Powers of 10, usually 5.
Yeah.
And that is for the children.
Ooh.
And then after that is House of X number 6. I am not ashamed of what I am.
Wow. All right. So tune in for that. This has been a HiX-Men report. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me, and we'll see you all next week. All right, Tyler, Peter, take us home.
Oh, let's see.
Good night.